Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, here today with yet another showcase video for y'all. It's another audio player review today, and this time it's the latest in Hidizs AP line of players. This time, as you can see, they've gone for a co-branding model with Linsoul. This surprisingly small little unit is the Hidizs X Linsoul AP80 Pro Max, launching today on Kickstarter at the early bird price ranging from between $140 to $160. I have no clue what the full retail price would be. If I had to guess, I would say somewhere between $170 and $200. This player features Hiby OS and audio circuitry that's near identical to Hiby's R3 II 2025. Does the AP80 Pro Max make sense as a sort of budget alternative to things like the M1 Plus, or should you save even more money and go with something like the V1? Well, let's find out together. Quick disclaimer, this unit was sent to me by Linsoul for review. As usual, I am not being paid for this review, but since I could turn around and sell this if I wanted to, I've gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you so much to Linsoul for sending this out, and thank you to all of you watching for your continued support. The unboxing experience on the Hidizs is pretty typical for a player at this price. You get the player itself, you get documentation, including this nice little postcard that they have. You get a couple of cables. You get a Type C to C sort of on-the-go cable for DAC use, and you get a longer USB A to C cable for charging and syncing. You also get a pair of additional screen protectors in case the one that comes included from the factory should become damaged or fall off. And overall, I think this is a pretty standard set of accessories. There is a leather case that is very, very tight on the unit. I had to take it off to swap SD cards, and I haven't been able to put it back on because, yeah, this is really slick and really smooth, but it's kind of difficult to get off because there's no way to push the player through. You got to sort of wiggle the top out through that little spoiler and sort of wiggle it out. It takes a really long time, but it is a very nice leather case. It is available as a package. $180 will get you the player and the case, but I don't know how much this case will cost after the Kickstarter campaign is over. I'm assuming it'll be like $20 like some of the other players' leather case options. Overall, like I said, the accessories I think are fine. I do wish it came with like a clear TPU case. Some of the competition does come with a clear TPU case in the box. So it's a bit of a bummer not to see one here, but then again, this is a little bit cheaper than some of the competition. So let's take a look at the physical design of the unit. The AP80 Pro Max is sort of an all-metal build with glass front and black panels and this little bit of plastic here on the top. It comes in 4 different colors. There's black, silver, this nice blue color, as well as a copper edition that has copper alloy on the outside that's $250 rather than the standard price for these units. The front of the unit, as you can see, is dominated by the screen. It has a built-in, pre-applied screen protector from the factory that doesn't have any really bubbles or flaws in it. It's rather nice there. The bottom of the unit features the USB C port as well as a 3.5mm single-ended and a 4.4mm balanced output. That is a legit balanced output, not a convenience 4.4 as you would expect at this price. The left side of the player is home to the SD card slot. Up to 2 terabyte cards are supported. The top of the unit is, like I said, plastic, and it's basically barren except for that little spoiler here that they put there. I think this is supposed to help the volume knob not get turned accidentally while it's in a pocket or something. The side here, speaking of the volume knob, is the transport controls as well as that volume knob. There's also a track quality indicator light here on the bottom. The buttons here are all metal. They feel rather nice and clicky, nothing super, cheap feeling. It's rather nice. You can see the light changing as it goes from standby to playing a high quality track there. It has this sort of ramp on this side and ramp on this side, again, to protect that button from being actuated in a pocket accidentally, which is kind of good. The back panel, as you can see, is glass and has all of these certifications and logos on it. This will need to come off in order for you to change the battery on this, but as you can see, there are no obvious screws or fasteners anywhere on the unit to undo, meaning you'll probably have to hit this with heat, put a suction cup on there, and then go around the edges with a spudger to try and get this panel off. And then once you get inside, I can almost guarantee you the battery is going to be soldered to the board here, so not great for repairability, guys. Speaking of repairability, my unit and several other pre-production units have had issues with this volume knob. It's wiggly to the point where I originally thought it was like a fancy joystick with like a rotary encoder built in. You can press it in to wake up the screen and put it back to sleep. Hidizs is aware of this issue, and they said that a lot of the pre-production units do have this fault, that the production units will have better, stiffer knobs. Honestly, as far as my overall thoughts go, it meets my pocket use criteria. I can have this in my pocket, volume up, down. I can figure out which buttons are which just based on the positioning. There's no raised indent here for me to feel around for it, but the fact there's only 3 and they're below the volume knob means that feeling for them is really easy. Center one is play pause, no real problem there. Those ramps here do make for a bit of a slightly comfortable feel depending on your hand. You can see that point there does dig into your palm after a little bit. Not something super serious, but it is a complaint that I have about it. My only major complaint, besides the sort of wiggly volume knob in terms of build quality, is the repairability and the absolute pain in the butt that this battery replacement will be someday. I just wish it was easier, some screws or something, a battery that had a connector as opposed to being soldered in, which I'm assuming, but pretty sure this is soldered in. Other than that, though, pretty solid overall. As I go ahead and pull up these specs here, you'll see that some of these specs are quite familiar if you've had another player in or around this price range. The AP80 Pro Max is powered by an Ingenic X1600E processor and runs Hiby OS. The screen is a 2.9-inch IPS panel with touch capability. Audio output comes via a pair of ESS9219C DACs with no listed amplifier chips. That means output power tops out at 340 milliwatts out of that balanced port, which is so far in these reviews the highest we have seen. There is no internal storage on the unit, so you'll have to bring your own SD card. As I mentioned, up to 2 terabyte cards are supported, which is nice to see. Media scanning on this unit was nice and quick, no problems, no issues, no complaints for the speed of that function. In terms of wireless connectivity, you've got Wi-Fi as well as Bluetooth 5.1 in both directions, transmit and receive. What that means is you can send music out to your set of Bluetooth headphones or a speaker, and you can also use this as a wireless Bluetooth dongle for your phone or laptop, which is also kind of nice. Weight for this unit is just under 90 grams, and the overall dimensions are a decent bit smaller than some of the competitor units out there, making this a smaller, more pocketable unit. Hidizs claims 12 hours of battery life, and in my standard cost test at high gain, I got 11 hours, so honestly really close to their claims. Charging is a little bit disappointing, topping out at a standard 5 watts, but of all the players I've tested, only 2 of them have actually made any use of the extra power delivery over USB C, so honestly about as expected. Battery life should improve a good bit with IEMs or less demanding headphones, especially on low gain, but making the player smaller does cut the size of the battery they can stick in there, so overall the battery life here is a logical trade-off. Overall, I would say for the size and price, the specifications are very good for this unit. Like with my review of the Tempotech V1, the user experience here will be no real surprise to users who have any experience with Hiby OS. The playback screen, as you can see here, is classic Hiby OS. You've got the volume number and the play pause indicator there at the top there. Let me get to 30, so play pause. You've got the time there in the center. You've got the Wi-Fi indicator, the battery percentage, the album art nice and big. That is a speed control, which I'll bring up later. You can tap to bring up the lyrics if they're encoded. Let me see if I can go back and get a song with lyrics. I think this one has lyrics built in. Yep, so lyrics right there. You have album, you have the album art, you have the title of the song, you have the artist, you have the track quality, you have your favorites button, the progress bar, you have the button for shuffle, repeat, so on and so forth. You have transport controls, and you have this little 3-button menu that lets you list the tracks that are coming up, add this to a playlist, mess around with the 5-band equalizer sort of on the fly. You also have the ability to see the album, see the properties of the file, and delete the file if you're the kind of person that prunes your collection sort of on the go. Let's go ahead and take a look at the music section here. So this is the music menu. You can browse all of your songs there. You can check out the individual file browser based on the storage here. You can also browse by album, you can browse by artists, and you can browse by album artists. Someone was pointing this out in my V1 video. You cannot go, I have multiple auto albums here. You cannot go from album artist to album to song. This just lists songs, which is, and I just tried to do something there, which I'll talk about in a minute. So that's a bit of a shame there. You also have genres. Now, where are your playlists, you're asking? Well, the playlists are actually up here in the star menu, where you have your favorites, your recently played, your playlists, and your recently added. Next to that is a little glass that lets you do some searching. You hit that, and then you have to input text in sort of old cell phone style, which is something I haven't done in quite a while. I'm a bit slow at it. The search is overall okay. It's a bit slow. I think it has something to do with the way files might be organized or tagged on your player, but Of the players that I have that have search, this is one of the ones that's slower at it. The other thing here is going to be your main audio settings screen, which is this here. You have MESB, which is Hiby's user-friendly EQ tweaker. If you'd rather do it yourself, as I said, you have that limited 5-band EQ that you have access to. Go back here. Update the database just scans your card. Music update mode, you can set it to do it manually, automatically, single things out for MQA, or distinguish English tracks from other languages. This is useful if you have multilingual tracks in your library like I do. Output selection is locked to headphone because I don't have anything plugged in right now. Right above that, play mode is just shuffle, repeat, so on and so forth. You have your DSD output settings here for gain and compensation. Resume play from last, as usual, is important for audiobooks. You can choose to have it not playing anything when you fire it up, to the last track you were playing, as well as where on that track you were. These settings do impact standby battery life, but in my opinion, not in a massive way. Gapless playback, what it says on the tin there. Sound field is Hiby's Dolby Atmos fake soundstagener. It can be fun. You can mess with that if you really want to. Maximum digital output volume is if you're using this to output to a DAC. Set that to on. You can manage your volume with the DAC rather than this. Max volume sets the max volume if you want to protect your hearing or limit the maximum volume for children. Fixed power on volume lets you set what volume the unit powers onto when you first turn it on, or if you just want to remember your volume setting, which is how I have it set. Crossfade, again, basically does exactly what it says. Gain lets you switch between high and low. I don't have anything plugged in, so it won't let me switch to that. Replay gain, if you have replay gain enabled in your track metadata, will let you do it by either album track or off. Back to by track, please. Thank you. The balance and digital filter are grayed out, but that's because I don't have anything plugged in. Digital filter, you have two options to choose from, and balance obviously would let you swing things left to right if you really want to. Playthrough folders, playthrough albums, basically what it says on the tin, as well as repeat function. Speed play enables that speed control that you saw there previously. And then auto slide to playback interface just means that if I go pick a song, it will automatically pull up the playback screen and see what's playing. So we've done the music menu, the playback screen, and all that. Let me also showcase real quick the shortcut menu. Some of these options will be missing because I don't have a source or a headphone plugged in, but you essentially get a brightness control, things for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, power on and off, MESB, and all that. I have DLNA turned off. You can pick what appears here in the menu, which I'll show you in a minute, and you also have playback controls there. That's useful for if you're, there we go. That's useful for if you're in a menu and you want to real quickly change a song or do something, you can just pull down instead of having to go back to the playback screen. But with that dealt with, let me take a quick break and we'll go through the rest of the menus in a second. So now let's go ahead and take a quick look at the main menu. This is it here. We already looked through the music section. We also have stream media. Tidal and Qobuz are supported here, but I'm not personally subscribed to either, so I can't tell you how the performance or the experience is with that. Wireless is where the Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and everything else sort of lives here. Hiby Link is if you have another enabled device on your Wi-Fi, it'll work with that. You can also import music via Wi-Fi if you have the leather case on, can't access your SD card anymore, and you don't want to use the device storage feature on the USB-C port here. I did not test DLNA. I don't have any DLNA servers on my network, but I do have several AirPlay devices which I was able to test. It worked pretty well. No real issues with the AirPlay feature. The range was half decent. I didn't have any issues so long as I was within a room of the device that I was broadcasting from, so no real problem there. Books is an interesting one. You can store EPUBs and sort of read them on this device. I don't know about y'all, but this screen is maybe a little bit too small for me to want to read a novel on. And if I want to listen to smooth jazz and read, I think I'll just pull out my Kindle Oasis in addition to this, so there's that. The About menu is just sort of the what firmware you're running, email for service and all that jazz, as well as your serial number. And then you have the actual system settings menu, which is where all of the other features here are. So language, what language do you want the player to be in? Backlight time, how long do you want the backlight to stay on after you've left it alone for a bit? Brightness is how bright the screen is. Theme color will let you, that's font size, fat finger mistake. Theme color lets you change the color of all the menus and the lettering here, whether you want it on or not. So if I turn it on, you can see that all of my stuff is a slightly different color than it was before. If I set it to red, hold on, my switch was on. Oh, I forgot to hit OK. There we go. There you go. See, all the backgrounds for everything changed slightly. I typically keep that off because I think the color is not really super necessary for me, but there it is. Back to that. Font size is just how big the letters are. USB working mode lets you use this as an external drive or as a straight up device, and you can toggle between the two if you're having issues with your PC. USB current limited, that's basically the setting that lets you bypass the battery. If that setting is on, it will save the battery on your phone by drawing current from the internal battery rather than your phone battery. If it is on, it will bypass the battery and pull all the current it needs to function from the USB-C port. That's good if you're using this as like a PC DAC. Speaking of using this as a PC DAC or outputting to a DAC, if you have some noise being caused by that, try the USB DAC feedback. That might fix it. Time setting just sets the time and date. Idle shutdown is how long it waits when there's no music playing to shut down the player. Sleep shutdown is a sleep timer. Battery percentage display is just that right there. I don't really see a reason to have that turned off. Standby is what it says. It just puts the player into standby when you're doing that sort of thing. Inline remote does work with the 3.5 millimeter jack. So if you have volume up, down, or play pause on your inline remotes, it will work through that. I did not test it with the 4.4. I don't have any 4.4 with inline controls. LED indicator basically just turns off that quality light. If you're somewhere in the dark or you want to preserve a tiny bit of battery, you can turn that on or off if you really want to. Button operation when screen is off basically lets you pause the playback with the screen off. Same goes for the volume operation. So the volume's at 30. If I turn the screen off, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it should be at 35. Yeah, so I'll go back down to 30. And for someone who uses their player in their pocket a lot, leave those on at all times. Shortcut menu lets you tweak what the options in that shortcut menu are. As I said, some of them don't show up just because they didn't have a headphone plugged in. Screensaver setting, you can either use your own image in the dynamic cover and it'll tell you where to put the file in the SD card. You can have it off, which is what I do because it makes me easier to just drive the player coming out of your pocket and make it quick, not having to swipe up and unlock the thing. Or you can have it be the album cover of whatever is playing. Restore factory settings basically wipes everything, puts it back to stock. Firmware updates to firmware either over the air or from the SD card. I did check right before filming. There is no new firmware as of now. And developer options is basically just the volume lock and the screenshot button, which didn't really do much for me. I was wondering if that's where you need to unlock the extra volume, but no, this one gives you all the way to 100 straight out of the box. No need to enable developer options and tweak it there. Yeah, so overall, that's the main settings here. I'll take a small break, and then we'll talk about my overall experience using this thing. So as far as overall usability goes, y'all saw me commit a couple of fat finger mistakes while doing the menus and things. You also saw me, like with the V1, favoring the swipe to go back as opposed to using that tiny little button up there, which I can just miss a lot of times. I did have a few more fat finger mistakes using this device compared to sort of other players of this type. But those do have larger screens, so it's to be expected. While I have been daily driving this for the last 2 weeks or so, my wife has been using this a lot more than I have because as soon as it came in and she saw sort of the size and the color, she said mine, and she's been using it for quite a bit. She did experience some frustrations. She also had a higher number than normal of touch screen mistakes due to the smaller screen. She also was the one who found that the search function wasn't always super quick or reliable. This could be down, as I said, to my library or the way my files are organized, but on other devices that have a search feature, I have found that it works a little bit faster or more reliable than on this. She also didn't like how inconsistent the letters here on the side were when you're scrolling through tracks. They can be a bit laggy and very just unintuitive to use sometimes. She commented that she didn't really dig how that worked. That's something they could fix in a firmware update. She also didn't feel like they, appeared when she wanted them to. She was a little bit frustrated with that, but it wasn't a massive complaint. Her main complaint, however, and also one of mine, and I'm going to need to go grab a visual aid for this, so 1 second. Okay, my apologies for the wait. So, my wife's main complaint, also a complaint that I had, doesn't really apply only to the AP80 Pro Max. In fact, this complaint really applies to any Hiby OS player that uses a knob to control volume, or any M-Touch player that uses a knob to control volume, or any Android player that has a knob to control the volume. And that complaint is, when you're in a long menu like this, why doesn't the volume knob let you scroll through the list? I understand that's not always a feature that people want, but all I have to say is, Apple figured this out decades ago. If you're looking through a large menu like this, you can use what is the volume control to scroll through all of your songs, and also it pops up a nice little alphabet menu there. And then as soon as you start playing a song and you no longer need to scroll, guess what? It works as, if my slow drive would work, it works as volume control. Because you're on the playback menu, obviously you're going to want to control the volume. Oh, you're on the menu that has a long scrolling list, obviously you're going to want to use it to scroll through those things. So for her, who doesn't really have a ton of experience with these players who used a device like this, and me who use a device like this, not having the ability to say to the player, okay, well, you're in a menu, just let me scroll. Oh, it's raising the volume, but that's not what I want because I'm currently scrolling through a list. I understand it's probably a niche complaint and it's a niche feature, but it's something that I've been requesting player manufacturers to activate in their players because I think it's a just real nice feature to have. It would make navigating menus so easy. Lots of players have really nice feeling knobs and wheels, and I can't believe it's even an option. They really should just need to add it as an option in the menu. I think it's honestly a great usability feature here. Outside of that, as far as I'm concerned, the AP80 was a very solid little player for my wife and for me. My main complaints, besides the scroll wheel not functioning as a scroll wheel, it's only a volume wheel, are, the small size and the button placement. It can make it a little bit awkward if you're holding it one-handed. Like, adjusting the volume is easy. You can just count the clicks. But if you're from this position and you want to go all the way down here to change songs or to press play, pause, it's not always the most, ergonomic way to do it, especially with that sort of sharp feature there digging into your hand. But as I said, overall it feels very nice and it's rather nice to use. But now let's go ahead and talk about the sound here. This is going to be typical for these segments in my reviews. In my testing, the output impedance of the AP80 Pro Max was low enough that it didn't affect the sound of my most impedance-sensitive IEMs, so things like the Bluetooth, the Relentless, the Super Mix 4, they didn't really change sound with this player, which is my only real criteria. Those IEMs are very sensitive to output impedance. The sound changes very easily with devices with high output impedance. The other thing that I didn't get is crazy hissing or noise during playback or quiet moments of tracks with very sensitive IEMs. What that means is the noise floor, at least to my ears, is nice and low, meaning that the playback was very clean sounding. As far as overall sound goes, the AP80 Pro Max is a familiar sound. The sound of the ESS DACs in here is familiar to me, and the way that they're implemented here is very nice, and it doesn't really have any issues or expose any problems with those chips. As y'all know, that's really all I care about. I don't need my player getting between me and my tracks, making me question what I'm hearing, or question if it's the player or the cable or whatnot. So as far as I'm concerned, the sound on the AP80 Pro Max here is great. No problems with it at all. But let's go ahead and get into the comparisons. I've brought two players in today that are sort of above and below this player in price range, as well as what I think is honestly this player's main competition. So without further ado, we'll get started with the budget option. And that budget option is the $90 Tempotec V1, the subject of my last video. The V1 is quite nicely built, but next to the AP80, it does feel like the more budget option. The metal quality on this is just a little bit nicer. The addition of a knob helps it feel more expensive as well. Despite the size on these two being actually quite similar in most respects, the screen on the V1 is much smaller and more difficult to navigate. As I said, there's no volume knob on this. Output on this is about a third lower than on the AP80, so it's about 66-67% of the max output that this can have. All of that said, I prefer the overall software experience here on the V1. I think that the menus are a little bit more intuitively laid out. I like the idea that the phone DAC, PC DAC, and Bluetooth DAC are all separate settings on the main menu, and you can just get into them by pressing a single button, and then bam, you're in DAC mode, and it's super easy. No real issues with that. On the AP80 here, you have to navigate a couple different menus to enable those features. You have to pick whether or not you want to bypass the battery separately. It's just a little bit more clunky to do the DAC mode here than you do on the V1. Now, Hidizs could absolutely implement that with a firmware update, so I don't think it's a massive major complaint here. If you do need that sort of functionality, and that's sort of your main use case. I think the V1 is a little bit cheaper and is a little bit better value. However, if you do need the extra output power for those headphones, or you just want that nice volume knob experience, I think that the Hidizs unit here could actually make for a pretty nice upgrade over the V1, especially if you manage to snag this for the Kickstarter price. We went under budget, so now let's go ahead and go over budget with the Shanling M1 Plus, priced at $200 US. If it's output power that you want, the M1 Plus has got that in spades. This is packing almost 700 milliwatts of power over that balance connector. That's almost double what the Hidizs is packing. You do, however, pay for that with a shorter overall battery life. In my standard testing, it was a case of 10 hours here versus 11 hours here. That's mostly in part thanks to the much larger battery here on the M1 Plus. In terms of operating system and sort of usability, the M1 Plus is running Shanling's M-Touch OS, which doesn't have the streaming capabilities of Hiby OS, so if you're a Tidal or a QO Buzz subscriber, this will probably be more useful to you. However, I feel like M-Touch OS is a little bit more music-centric with options for sorting and organizing your tracks. I had that comment earlier that was talking about whether you could sort by artist and then album, and here you absolutely can. You can go artist, and then I have multiple auto albums on here, and there's the actual albums, and then you can get into the individual songs from that menu. So if that's the sort of functionality that you were hoping for, you can get that here on the M1 Plus. Combine that with the fact that the transport controls here are on the same side as the volume knob, but here they're on the opposite side, meaning that one-handed operation with the M1 is a breeze. You can use your fingers here to go forward, back, play, pause, and then this one to drive the volume. It feels super solid in the hands. It's got that nice little hand-shaped shape here that just helps it feel solid here. It's just nicer, and in my opinion, it's one of the more well-balanced players in this category and at this price. Unfortunately, it is also a good bit larger, a good bit thicker, and a good bit heavier than the Hidizs here. And it also has shorter battery life. If you do want that extra power and you don't stream and you want, in what my opinion is a nicer feeling volume knob, the M1 Plus can make a lot of sense over the Hidizs, especially if the post-Kickstarter price brings these two closer in price. If size, however, is your primary concern, the Hidizs is clearly the slimmer, more portable, more pocketable player. Now we come to the big one, what I think is the main competition for the AP80 Pro Max, the Hiby R3 II 2025 edition. This is the sort of last year's model of the Hiby R3 family, since the R3 Pro 2 is now out, but this is still available from Hiby, brand new for $160 US. Not only is this priced similarly to the Hidizs, these two are using the exact same DAC chips. They have a very similar control layout with the transport buttons under the volume knob and a quality light on the side here. They also have the same processor, are running the exact same operating system. Now, the menus overall are a little bit different, but honestly, they're laid out nearly identically down to the same like color change feature here on the on both of these here. The screen on the Hidizs, as you can see here, in my opinion, is noticeably nicer than the one on the R3 II here. This one just looks a little bit dimmer. This is an IPS panel. I don't believe this is an IPS panel, so that could very well be what's going on here. But battery life is an easy win for the Hiby. On the exact same battery life test, this got 18 hours of constant playback, whereas this only got 11. That is to be expected. Again, look at the size. While the thickness is overall the same, this is wider as well as ever so slightly taller, so they could obviously fit a bigger battery in this one. The Hidizs, I think, does have the better feeling volume wheel. Not only does it click slightly more satisfyingly than the R3 one, but a big complaint on the R3 here was that because that volume wheel isn't really protected, as you're putting it in and out of your pocket, it clicks extremely easily, and you can find your volume getting out of adjustment just by, pulling it in and out of your pocket. These ramps here on the AP80 Pro Max do help prevent that problem a lot more, and it will be the nicer volume knob, assuming they fix that wiggle. Choosing between these two might not seem that easy, but honestly, I think it is pretty easy. If you want a larger player with a slightly lower quality screen, but with much longer battery life and a ever so slightly better UI, just the way that the menus are laid out, I think that the R3 is the way to go. However, if you want a smaller player with the same output power and a smaller but much nicer looking screen that's also higher resolution, I think that the Hidizs makes a great alternative, especially if it's at that lower Kickstarter early bird price. And that takes me rather neatly into the recommendation section. Now, I do not know officially what the standard price of the AP80 Pro Max here will be once the Kickstarter campaign ends. But taking into account the past Hidizs Kickstarter campaign pricing, they tend to make the standard retail price on their site around 8 to 10% less of a discount than on the early bird pricing on Kickstarter. The standard early bird price on this right now is $150, so my best guess for the actual price on the Hidizs website after this goes on regular sale is around 170, 180-ish US dollars. At that price, this is roughly in line with its very similar cousin, the R3 II 2025. Now, I really like the R3. I think it's one of the better value players now that it's at its lower price since the R3 Pro 2 came out, and the battery life here is absolutely exceptional. Where the Hidizs stands out is the size and that screen. Battery life is lower, but that's to be expected. The battery itself is smaller. The screen is smaller, which means navigation's a little bit more clunky than it can be on the R3, but it is bigger than the one on the V1, and as I said, it looks much nicer than the one on the R3. I feel like if you're making a player roughly in the same price range with the same features, chips, and everything as another brand, you need something to differentiate yourself. You need something that will separate your player in the eyes of buyers that will make them pick yours over the other one. And what Hidizs has done here is made something for people who really value a smaller, more pocketable player with a really nice quality screen. If that's what you're looking for, you will find the AP80 Pro Max very appealing. In the time I have had it, it has been my wife's go-to player when we go on walks or when we go to events. She used it at CanJam, she used it at the Bay Area Hi-Fi Con, and while she's had minor complaints about it, like the search and the touchscreen being a bit clunky and the scroll wheel not scrolling, she's overall very, very much enjoyed her time with it, and a lot of her issues with it aren't really the fault of Hidizs, but rather more things with Hiby OS in general. And if it's between this and the R3, she actually prefers this because she would rather have a smaller player that's easier to fit in a pocket, even if it's slightly more clunky in terms of touchscreen, versus a larger, chunkier player that just you feel in the pocket that little bit more. So because of her input, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the This Is Brilliant tier, especially if you can secure it for the $140 or $150 Kickstarter early bird price. I think that this makes a nice upgrade over something like the Variations V1 from Tempotech, and I think that it is a nice way to save some cash if you've been looking at something like the M1 Plus. If you really need a larger screen with larger battery life, the R3 II 2025 is still a great option, but I really think there's something to be said for the smaller Hidizs player here. I think it's quite nice, especially in this nice blue color. You should get the blue color. However, just like in my MK12 video, I will caution folks about the large number of people, including myself, who have had negative experiences with Hidizs' customer service. I don't know if it's improved or not since I had my experience, but one thing I will say is that if you like this player, because it is co-branded with Linsoul, it will eventually be available, not just from Linsoul directly, but also Linsoul's Amazon store. And if it's available on Amazon, the returns policy is going to be a breeze, at least in my experience. So if you're hesitant to buy directly from Hidizs and you're willing to forego the between 10 and 40, maybe 30-ish dollar discount from getting on Kickstarter, just be patient and get this from Linsoul's Amazon store, where the return policy will be ever in your favor. That's going to do it for my review of the AP80 Pro Max. Today is launch day, so if this is something you're interested in, I'll have the link to the Kickstarter down in the description so you can secure your Kickstarter early bird price. Or wait for these to be available on Linsoul's Amazon store. Personally speaking, I would wait for the Amazon, but you guys can do whatever you guys want to do. Coming up, as far as non-IEM videos go, not 100% sure. Headphone Hoedown, is coming back with a vengeance. So look forward to some headphone content in the next couple of weeks. But for now, as usual, thank you all so very, very much for watching. Massive shout out to my Compadres Club members. Remember, $5 a month, and you get to decide what I review with your money, and you help make the channel more independent, less reliant on samples and tours, which I very, very much appreciate. I really hope all of you enjoyed the video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.